Welcome to Awakening Through Sleep, an integrative child sleep foundation solution. My name is Mar Oscategui. I am the founder of the International Maternity and Parenting Institute. I'm also the founder of the Association of Professional Sleep Consultants. I'm also the founder of Business Sanctuary, and then my own personal coaching is Physical Awakening. I feel very blessed and honored to be here with all of you today to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart. The world of sleep is so meaningful to me on many levels, but today's focus is going to be at looking at an integrative child sleep solution. So first I'm going to begin by, before I give the purpose and mission, I'm just going to provide some technicalities. I will, at the very end, take questions. For now, I'm going to have everybody on mute. However, if you are inspired with a comment or a question, please feel free to type it into the chat box. This way, toward the end of the webinar, I will have the opportunity to view your questions in the chat box and answer them. For those of you that are not able to attend, or if you know anybody that might be inspired by today's call and were not able to attend, I will have a recording available after that I will post into the events page. However, today's recording will only be audio. So those of you that have not attended will not be able to actually see the presentation. I will provide my email at the end, and if you're interested, I can actually email you the presentation so that you can go ahead and view it along with the audio recording once you have it. And then let's see if there's anything else that I have to share with you. Technically, I think that's it. All right, let's go ahead and begin. So my purpose and mission is to introduce a new holistic, progressive, and integrative non-sleep training way of approaching child sleep that emphasizes sleep health, family dynamics, education, support and prevention during pregnancy, after birth, and beyond. To expand and change how we perceive child sleep. To understand child sleep as a family issue addressing specific families' needs. To understand your energetic tempo and how that affects your sleep and those around you. To understand how sleep is greatly affected by lifestyle. How nutrition, emotional well-being, green living, health, and safety or security play a tremendous role in child sleep. And to understand the role of behavior and why sleep training is not usually the main focal point and often not necessary. I'm passionate about this. Being a birth professional, also being a mother of 2 children, an 8-year-old, almost 8-year-old, and just turned 3-year-old, and also working with many, many clients over the years who have endured a lot of sleep deprivation, who've had issues with their child sleep, and then also working with my current members, students and graduates in the International Maternity and Parenting Institute. It is so clear the relationship between our journey toward having a baby and starting a family, and they really go hand in hand. So all the practices and the mindfulness and things that we do, my background in yoga has played such a tremendous role in understanding the overall picture, understanding the overall picture, and getting to the root of the sleep challenges. Because one of the things that I'll be sharing today is understanding quite often that when we address a child sleep challenge, we often don't get to the root of it. It's not a separate matter where most oftentimes when we look at a child sleep issue, we pertain the issue to the child and are not really understanding how the entire family dynamic is not only being affected, but how we're also affecting that situation. And then lifestyle and beliefs. I'm always intrigued tremendously by how our lifestyle and beliefs, the patterns and things that we have over time strengthened, affect our sleep. My goal, if there's anything that you get out of today, my overall goal is that to invite a new integrative approach to child sleep, to expand the way that you're thinking about child sleep, and to understand that one size does not fit all. There are many books, there are many articles, there are many studies and research. And, and especially with the research and the studies, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, they show very strongly their side and their case as being completely true. And while that may be true, while some research shows, look, we did this study, right? We did the study on co-sleeping and so on, and we're showing why it's dangerous and whatnot, let's just say. At the same time, you can also just as convincingly and with other research look at the opposite. And so in seeing and understanding that, both sides can very well present research on why you should go with one side or the other, I come from a middle approach where I actually look at both sides and have found that it's not so much about fitting into any one of these sides. It's really about understanding what the dynamic is, what the circumstances are, not fitting into what someone's approach or perception is, but actually looking at all of the different things and seeing what fits into your lifestyle and situation. So this webinar today is designed for professionals and for parents, again, just to give you that overview. And there's so much to talk about. I'm coming out with a book in 2016, and my book will go into specifics, into the science, into so much. Today, for time purposes, is just an introduction. I'm giving just an introduction, enough information to get you excited, to pique your interest, and to continue having more. Before I continue, I want to just take a moment to give thanks. There are a tremendous amount of people that have influenced and have inspired me to get to where I am today and to be able to present what I'm presenting to you today. If it wasn't for them, I don't think I would have this integrative approach here before you. So I would like to take a moment to thank all my yoga teachers, to thank APA, Birth Psychology. You've been such a tremendous, wonderful piece in all of this. I'd like to thank Ann Caird for her piece in this, and so many, James McKenna, Dr. Ruben Nyman. I can list so many people. All my yoga mentors and all my holistic lifestyle and health coach, my fitness. There's so much to list. I'm not going to go over all of them. So I don't have names. I will mention names in my book, but I just wanted to take a moment to really just deeply appreciate all of you for your contribution and allowing me to then be able to present what I'm presenting today. I also want to take a moment to invite you to just reflect a little bit before we get started on your current perception of child sleep. So all of us have perceptions, and those perceptions are based on a number of things. What we learn from, study, perhaps books and research, what we learn from experience. We also perceive things from what's encoded in our bodies, which is also very fascinating work. So there's lots of ways we learn from media, by example. We learn in so many ways. And how are you perceiving child sleep? What is your overall perception about it? Just take a moment to reflect on that. And then I'd like to invite to reflect on how many of you use sleep training and just your overall perception on sleep training. Sleep training it's changing, but pretty much is and has been the standard for child sleep. And then that might lead you to think about what some of the most common methods are. For example, some of you may have heard or even used extinction, fertilization, so those would be categorized under cry it out. You may do more of a gentle approach, maybe like a Sleep Lady Shuffle, Kim West. You may be on the other side and just do like a no cry. And so there's many methods, and generally they fall under these categories of cry it out, no cry, or gentle sleep in between. So I'd like to invite, I always find it very fascinating to look historically at where sleep training came from. So when I began my research and began understanding, well, first of all, noticing what sleep training does and what's behind it, historically where it comes from and how it got to where it is today is really fascinating. So, and I would like to note as a disclaimer that I'm not necessarily saying I'm against sleep training. I never really like to make an absolute like that. For me, it's really more about, so that's not the issue. I'm not here to try to convince people not to sleep train. That's not my mission here. My mission is to expand a new way of thinking. And regardless of how you take that and how you use sleep training, right, is up to you. For me, it's just really recognizing where it came from, its place, and understanding why a new approach is necessary and very helpful to apply. So if you look at the history of child sleep and sleep training, in the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century, mothers were warned not to spoil their children. Cribs were moved to another room if the home was large enough. There was a fear of creating demanding monsters. And then as we went into the 20th century, detached methods began and were invited of no breastfeeding and bottle feeding. And then in 1894, Dr. Luther Emmett Holt, an American pediatrician and child rearing expert, was the first person to make the cried-out approach explicit. Then behavioral psychologist John B. Watson in 1928 introduced his behavioral approaches. And so the behavioral piece of training a child to sleep really began to take hold at that point in time. It was a behavior-oriented. Then there were some influences that came a bit later on from Dr. Benjamin Spock, who had like this, the child Bible, the child rearing Bible. Dr. Richard Ferber, Dr. Mark Weisbluth, we have Pantley, Kim West, and we have tons other. We have so many more. We've got Pinky McKay, who's out there. We've got many. I think Tizzy Hall. So many others out there. But this is just to give you an overview historically of where this has started and where we've gotten to. One of the first things I noticed when I began to work with child sleep training is I began to notice and understand that child sleep training is not recommended for children under 6 months of age. Some start a lot earlier. They start at 4 months of age, between 4 and 6 months. But in general, it's to say that 6 months of age is when we begin child sleep training. And what was really a surprise to me, especially coming from the health background that I come from, is that we don't address sleep during pregnancy. And by the time children are 6 months of age, one can only imagine, and you yourself may have experienced, the amount of sleep deprivation that has led up to that point, right? About 78%, according to the National Sleep Foundation, about 78% of pregnant women, expecting moms, experience some kind of sleep challenge during pregnancy. And if you were to do a little bit of research and start to go into forums or even talk to your expecting mom friends, usually you find out that, if you were to ask them about sleep challenges they're experiencing, they'll mention them, but they'll be like, oh, that's just part of being pregnant, right? They take it as a given of being part of being pregnant. It comes with the territory, right, if you will. And the reality is that it doesn't have to be that way. So I started really looking into why we are not addressing sleep and sleep education and sleep planning during pregnancy, when it's actually needed the most and when it can set up such a really, really strong and important foundation, not only for birth, but especially for postpartum. And so, a woman becomes pregnant, her body's undergoing many, physiological and biochemical changes, and as a result, the potential for sleep disturbances increase. This can create a number of things, from nighttime waking, bladder pressure, fatigue issues are common, nausea. Sleep deprivation can lead to complications such as preterm labor, extended labor, and even other sleep disorders such as sleep apnea, snoring, restless leg, and insomnia. And then sleep disorders developed during pregnancy can also lead to sleep disorders in the child. So understanding this, it allows us, for those of you that are already doing child sleep consulting, I want to inspire you to really expand into the pregnancy realm and to support sleep at a much earlier stage. And for those of you that are perhaps, birth doulas or midwives, coaches, chiropractors, masseuses, anyone, again, working during pregnancy, I inspire you to bring up the topic of sleep. It is so important. It is fundamental. Quite often we give 3 aspects of survival in our health, breath, water, and food, a lot of importance, right? Because without breath is like the first thing to go. We don't survive. And then if you're not hydrated, you don't survive. And if you don't have food, you don't survive. But I like to add to those sleep. Sleep deprivation can also lead to death and is such a fundamental part of our human functioning. So breath, water, food, and sleep are the fundamental foundations of our survival and overall well-being and functioning. And when those are not balanced, they can lead to all sorts of things. I also wanted to point out that the sensory modalities of mothers and infants mutually affect each other. It's not just the mother changing the infant's sleep and physiological status, but also the infant regulating the mother's behavior and physiological status as well. So there is this co-regulation, there's this symbiosis happening, and even, throughout the entire pregnancy process, birth, and afterwards. James McKenna has done so much amazing work and research. And one of the things that he's brought up in a recent article, and many others have this too, but he's really highlighted, is even synchronized breath and how we can synchronize our own breath to our child. And just that alone can change the dynamics of a child's energies. It's really, really remarkable. So now I'm going to move on to why sleep training is controversial and most often not necessary. Sleep training is an old term that conjures up ideas of babies being forced into something that does not come naturally. It involves a behavioral approach, usually, to train babies to sleep from cried out to no cry and gentle in-between approaches. Behavioral approaches most often overlook specific health components that not only relate to the child but to the family. So behavior, this is such a key word, because when I came to understand, well, what is it about behavior and why is it important to expand our perception and way of thinking beyond behavior? Well, behavior, by definition, and there's many, but I took the one from Wikipedia, is the range of actions and mannerisms made by individuals, organisms, systems, or artificial entities in conjunction with themselves or their environment, which includes the other systems or organisms around, as well as the inanimate physical environment. Behavior is the response of the system or organism to various stimuli or inputs, whether internal or external, conscious or subconscious, overt or covert, and voluntary or involuntary. So that was key for me, the response of the system or organism to various stimuli or inputs. So when I started really looking deeper into why is there a sleep issue with this child, what is going on, the underlying reason for that behavior really stuck out for me. I wanted to dig deep into that, and I'll talk a little bit about more in a moment. Unfortunately, many sleep approaches ignore the child's emotions and focus on physical needs of sleep, nutrition, associations, and behavioral approaches such as controlled crying, extinction, or gradual withdrawal. And quite often, it's so methodical and so systematic that there's no room for curiosity. There's no room to learn from our children. We learn these systems, we learn these approaches. Here's the directions, here's the instructions. We follow them. But then our children may be sending us messages and other things for us to learn that are perhaps within, but also outside of that system, that if we're not allowing ourselves to be open and curious to that, we miss. And so there's a lot of potential of missing some important fundamental development and connections between children and their families as a result. James McKenna says parents with less rigid ideas about how and where their babies should sleep are generally much happier and far less likely to be disappointed when their children cannot perform the way they're supposed to. Example, sleeping through the night. So our perceptions, our beliefs, what we're told to do, your child must sleep between this time and that time, this many amount of hours, and this, if your child is not in this box in the system, there's something wrong. That perception and understanding for parents that something is wrong places a great amount of stress on them. When they are placed under a lot of stress, their expectations of what they need to do for their family and their child changes, right? And creates additional stress. So understanding how our own perceptions and beliefs influence the situation is also very important. Okay, so I talked a bit about behavior, and so I'm going to lead into this a little bit more, just to open up again a different understanding and perception of this. If behavior is a response of the system or organism to various stimuli inputs, whether internal, external, and so on, we need to understand what underlies one's behavior before applying any approach. So when we're looking at any child behavior, it's not just, oh, this is their behavior, give them the sleep lady shuffle or extinction and they'll learn to sleep. It's, oh, this is their behavior. What's the cause of that behavior? What's underlying that behavior? And by understanding that, by beginning to dig deep there, that will uncover some very interesting things that may bring up unresolved issues, may bring up things that we didn't notice that need more attention, and so on. From a baby's point of view, and even the reality for all of us, although our culture and our way of perceiving things may not be this way, the reality is that the only permanence is change. Change, we're constantly evolving and changing. Change is constantly happening. And it is not the stronger, the most intelligent that survive, but the most adaptable. What supports change and transition is a deep-rooted connection and openness to that change. So as caregivers, as professionals, as parents, if we ourselves have a perception or such a rigidity and understanding that things are only this way, and we're boxed into that, we're not allowing ourselves or our children the opportunity to be adaptable. Children are extremely resilient. They can handle quite a bit. So can we, actually. And we cannot prevent certain challenges in life. We're all going to be challenged. Life has many, many challenges. And so my understanding and where I've come, at peace with, suffering and traumas and different things that happen, especially to children and parents, my understanding that, yes, we can take measures to prevent those things, but we also have to be very forgiving and understanding that life's journey brings to us many, many challenges. And it's not always for us to resist those challenges or to see those challenges as something bad. But in actuality, it is up to us to understand that through our resiliency, through our adaptability, through our deep-rooted connection and openness, through our strong connections with each other, getting through that challenge gives us the ability to evolve and to change and to also give back. So the more we can foster this, not only within ourselves, but in our children, we're going to have a better ability to invite a family dynamic of well-being that includes a sleepful peace, peaceful sleep. So what's all the fuss about cried out and no cry, the role of crying? Crying is a big, big topic, and I understand that there are these two strong sides of no crying and crying, basically. And so I took these two quotes by Why They Cry by Henry Van Riget and Franz Pluich. Not only can a newborn not distinguish between his senses, he also is unable to make a distinction between sensations that originate within his own body and those that come from outside of it. As far as he's concerned, the outside world and his body are one and the same. What happens outside happens inside too. I recently shared a quote on my personal Facebook page and in some of the groups that I'm in. And this quote, I'll actually read it to you. I'm just going to be bringing it up right here. It says, and it's by Jung, it says, if there is anything we wish to change in the child, we should first examine it and see whether it is something that could be better changed in ourselves. Very, very powerful quote. And so that speaks a lot to what this is saying, especially within that fourth trimester of a child. A child's way of asking for help is to cry. A child's way of communicating is to cry. A child automatically starts crying until someone else rectifies the situation. And the child's not capable of putting some things right without help from adults. If they refuse, he will cry incessantly until he's completely exhausted. So with crying, the way that I have understood, putting all together all these sides of no cry, cry it out, for me, the issue is not crying. Crying is a way of communicating. Crying is necessary. It's a necessary, normal function. And so the more we can become comfortable with that, the easier it is going to be for us to understand how to work with that, with the crying. So what's really important is not to prevent crying or to excessively cry. The real important point about crying to understand is how we respond to the crying. Crying is natural, but how we respond to our child's crying is the key. So for example, if we leave a child, if a child is crying and we leave a child to cry alone by themselves, that response is very different than if we allow a child to cry, but then are in their presence. And it's interesting because I've had this conversation with many about this specific topic, about, no, it's not a big deal, let your child go cry, lock the room, and walk out. And I even think of us as adults and how often we cry and how great it feels when we have someone with us to hold us or to console us or to be in our presence. So we're not trying to stop the crying or to prevent the crying. It's a normal, natural human function. But what we're actually doing is saying, it's natural to have support, natural to have connection and physical presence through crying. I mean, obviously, we want to first understand where the crying is coming from, because that crying can be an actual, need, and usually is a need. But I also want to introduce from a psychological standpoint and from a deep-rooted standpoint of connection, that it's how we respond to crying that is the key, and not so much about preventing crying or being afraid of excessively crying. We really want to understand. There's lots of articles that say crying is great, right? And lots of articles that say why, all those kinds of things. But it's not a black and white issue. You really have to look at the circumstance. There is such a thing as too much crying. And there is also such a thing as if you don't cry and you bottle it up, that can also, be very unhealthy. And so there's a fine line, and we need to understand that in every circumstance, we need to look at a number of factors to then know whether crying is too excessive or whether it's being bottled up. But more than anything, how we respond to that is the key. And so if anything that you take away from this is just that perception of crying and what it really means and how we're actually modeling that crying. So sometimes my children are older now, they're no longer infants, but my children need to cry, especially, actually I can use my 3-year-old, he's at the tantrum stage and just wants his way and cries. And so, resilient and also just determined and won't give up. And, but things are the way they are. And if I do give in to him, I'm also showing him that, things in our family or household are kind of wishy-washy. And sometimes, we have certain rules and certain ways of functioning as a family that is really, really important that we together, are consistent with. So do I ignore my child and pay him no attention? Well, first of all, I don't make it a big deal and big issue, because if I do, I'm feeding into him. But what I do is I hold my presence. I give him reassurance and security that he knows that even though he's crying, that I'm there, and that I'm there, in his presence and helping him get through this part, for him to deal with this change, and so on. So anyway, that's just an example there. I don't want to go too far off. Another point I want to make is that often studies are misrepresented. And when I say misrepresented, I'm not trying to negate or bring any, invalidate studies, okay? Studies, yeah, they do have validity, and they do bring a lot to them, and there's no question that they use subjects and situations and circumstances, but they're also misrepresented, meaning that they usually don't include the whole picture to a whole entire situation. They just include a piece to it, so that when they share a study with you, that study is just based on one aspect, one piece of a much, much larger puzzle. So quite often, we get confused, and we're like, what's right? We see studies for crying and no crying. We see studies for co-sleeping. We see studies for all sorts of things. Some common misrepresentations are babies manipulate, babies must sleep the exact hours according to the sleep chart, babies are creating sleep associations and bad habits when rocking, co-sleeping, breastfeeding, co-sleeping is dangerous. And what I say to all of that is that you have to look at every circumstance. You have to weigh in all the factors involved. If you're in a co-sleeping situation, Dr. James McKenna has an entire guidelines. What I find very fascinating is whenever there's an article or a news story of how, bed sharing, co-sleeping, and I know there's a difference, right? Bed sharing, you're actually sharing a bed. Co-sleeping, you can have the bassinet next to your bed, for example, in the same room. So there's that difference. But just generally, the terms bed sharing, co-sleeping kind of get mixed up in the media world, let's put it that way. And quite often you hear that it's dangerous, and these articles and stories will come out of children that had died as a result. And when you start digging deeper into those stories, you quite often learn that the guidelines were not followed, that these situations and circumstances, there had been a caregiver on medication or obesity involved or what have you, and there are clear guidelines that if those are not in place, then yes, that does create a dangerous situation. But I find it very interesting that in the mainstream media, they quite often do not mention those parts of it. They just blatantly put out there, co-sleeping, bed sharing, dangerous. And then, they give you a very general, watered down version of the story without all the details. And so that puts a spin and perception was not really representing the full picture. Okay? Now, another very interesting fact here is Dr. Gwen Dwyer. She is similar to Dr. James McKenna, an anthropologist, and she has a really great website called parentingscience.com, so I encourage all of you to visit that. And also James McKenna, of course, has the Mother Behavioral Institute. And she states, and this is an example of sleep requirements, because I cannot tell you how many people I've worked with that are so stressed out about the sleep requirements. Oh, my baby, is not sleeping to these exact hours of this chart and so on. And so it's interesting. She did a bit of research on this, on sleep requirements and how they're estimated. And she says, everybody knows that babies need more sleep than older children do, but how much? When I began researching baby sleep requirements, I assumed that those authoritative charts we see published everywhere, the ones telling us that the average newborn needs 16 hours of sleep, for example, were based on scientifically established biological needs. I figured that somebody must have identified a link between, say, a certain number of sleep hours and optimal rates of child growth, or between sleep hours and rates of infection. I was wrong, she says. It turns out that scientists know relatively little about baby sleep requirements. The sleep charts that you see in parenting books and websites are based on how much time parents, typically Western parents, say their babies spend time sleeping. For instance, studies of Australian babies reveal that the average newborn gets about 16 to 17 hours of sleep over a 24-hour period of time. Babies aged 4 to 6 months average 14 hours, and so on. So again, it's, what I share with people is, okay, look at charts and these different studies, but use them as a blueprint, but stay open and be flexible and stay open to really learn, because our children are our teachers as well. We are there to help guide and teach our children, and they're doing the same for us. And so no matter how many books you read, no matter how much advice you get, no matter how many classes you attend, the reality is that there is an open portal that exists at all times for us to learn about our children. And so if we keep that portal open, we will find what is right for us and our family. And even as professionals, we also will be able to see what's appropriate for families based on that perception and way of thinking. The other thing I want to point out is that a lot of families do go to their pediatricians for sleep advice. And most pediatricians do refer to the, extinction, right? Or to more of a ferberization, to a gradual extinction. These pediatricians, and I'm generalizing, there's many that have actually gone into a more holistic route. But most of them, the amount of training that they've had in sleep is 6 hours in medical school, 6 hours. So even their understanding of this world is very limited, which is another reason why I find it is so important and so key for us to dig deeper and to expand our perception of how we're approaching child sleep. Oftentimes, parents do not associate the fact that poor sleep habits developed prior to their baby's arrival could also be contributing to their child's sleep challenges after birth. When a child is experiencing sleep challenges, the whole family is affected. That is why it's critical to address both child and adult sleep, and when possible, begin supporting healthy sleep habits during pregnancy. So this is not to place a guilt trip on parents or this you must do this. If you don't do this, your child's going to turn out this way. It's not like that. It's just, if we allow ourselves to expand our way of thinking, in any situation that we're in, let's just even say, I'll expand it to, if you live with roommates, if you're in a tribe, your family household, when you are in a situation where there's more than one person in that situation, we are all affecting each other. Even not in a family household, obviously at your workplace, everywhere we go, we're interconnected, right? There's this connection, we're all affected by one another. But particularly in the household, there is a closer, deeper connection. And biologically, quite often, unless there's been an adoption, usually there is, again, this deeper connection going on. So understanding that when child sleep issues are not just about the child, our own habits, our own energy. Dr. Ruben Nyman has a really fabulous book. It's more on adult sleep or just sleep in general. It's called Healing Night, The Science and Spirit of Sleeping, Dreaming, and Awakening. And he uses quite a few key terms that I absolutely love. One of them is the energetic tempo. He talks about our energetic tempo and understanding how we've been entrained and understanding that the energetic tempo of people and things that we affiliate with are going to affect the tempo and rhythm of our life. So when he looks at, our biological clock and circadian rhythms and things like that, and how that factors into our sleep, he also takes into consideration the energetic tempo. And that energetic tempo is absolutely affected by our environments, by those we hang out with. So a child, and I shared with you, from Why They Cry, that excerpt from the book earlier, when a child has just, not only in the womb, but especially coming out of the womb, they're not at that level of distinguishing their inner and outer world. And so it's so key to understand the energetic tempo that we're carrying in the environments that our children are sleeping in absolutely have an effect. One of the examples is, and how by changing that, it affects each other. So one example is like McKenna just did an article, I believe it was like 6 months ago or so, and he talked about how, he first witnessed this co-regulation when, he noticed the relationship between the synchronized breath, and the moment the mother started taking slower breaths, breathing more slowly, how the baby's nature and energy started to also calm down, and so on. So yes, it's very, very fascinating and very important to be aware of. And we do as adults have a certain responsibility. And again, this is not about placing guilt. It's not about trying to limit ourselves or anything like that. It's just really trying to understand the depth of connection, the depth of influence we all have in each other. And then when we have that awareness in our space, we're able to take action. We're able to empower ourselves into a new situation. So one of my goals, like I said, is to expand our way of child sleep, our way of perceiving child sleep. And part of that process involves our expansion and way of thinking that sleep consulting, sleep coaching, when you're working with a sleep coach, that does not equal sleep training. all the current students, members, and graduates of my institute, Maternity and Parenting Institute, I'm sure can tell you that I emphasize this day in and day out. They probably are sick of me hearing this, but they are trained to understand that when we have a child sleep issue, when we're working with a family, it's not, oh, what sleep training methodology? This is how most child sleep consultants have been trained. They've been trained to automatically apply a methodology and to figure out which methodology is appropriate for a family. However, this is not a holistic or integrative approach. We have to first, like I said, understand all the nuances, all the factors, understand what is happening, what is underlying this behavior. That is going to let us know then what approach we take. Many child sleep consultants are not spending enough time getting to the root of a child's sleep challenges, unless you're an IMPI graduate. No, I'm just kidding. Or, there's many of you out there that I'm sure maybe have not taken a program and have come to this awareness yourselves. And there are still too many sleep consultants jumping too quickly to implement a specific sleep training system before addressing key root issues like I just discussed. Yes, so that's one of the major pieces of understanding this new way of thinking. The other is that a solitary infant sleep environment represents a neurobiological crisis for human newborns, as this microenvironment is ecologically invalid for meeting the fundamental needs of human infants. Indeed, sleeping alone in a room by itself and not breastfeeding are now recognized as an independent risk factor for SIDS, a fact that explains why most of the world has never heard of SIDS. So, look, again, with understanding this is that it's so important, especially for children, to establish that deep connection. And one of the things that I've been learning in birth psychology, and also with Michelle Emmanuel, who has done an amazing contribution with the polyvagal theory and sensory and social interaction, is really understanding the importance of social interaction and how that actually affects the nervous system and how that develops one. It's not just about being in an overstimulated or calm state. It really is about understanding that deep connection and social interaction are key elements for a child's development and for them to also feel safe and secure. Now, there's no question, I will tell you, there are instances where, people do need to sleep alone. And I've experienced that, and I've had others who, have partners and things where they snore too loud or other things going on, and sharing a bed is just not working. So all of that has to be looked into, and we have to weigh in all these factors. Again, there's no absolutes. Things are always evolving. We have to understand the full situations of every circumstance. But with that said, we also have to really understand this other piece, especially as a child is developing. And so it is key to really understand that and to look at that. There was an article that came out, I think I saw it on Gina Kirby. Gina Kirby's another wonderful influence in this whole birth community, and she has a progressive parenting radio and a really great website, and she had posted an article recently by someone talking about, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and how they've pretty much, she was showing cases of how they pretty much are getting it a bit wrong on certain levels and understanding certain things. And anyway, really good information. Okay, so moving on, transitioning from the word sleep training to a new possibility. One of the terms that I also learned from Dr. Ruben Nyman is surrendering to sleep. How many of us can say that we surrender to sleep? What is your relationship to sleep? Is your relationship to sleep one that's like a love-hate relationship? Just like, right? How often can many of us relate to, I don't need sleep. And we compromise our sleep. It's like, we've got to sleep, right? Or how many of us are like, I can't sleep. We can't stand, what's happening with sleep. We're just we have these harsh expectations of sleep. Surrendering to sleep is giving us the ability to literally surrender to sleep and to invite sleep in a whole new way, a whole new relationship. That means really falling in love with sleep. Dr. Ruben Nyman had a recent article about, they interviewed people who are good sleepers. And they listed 7 factors. And one of those factors is that they're in love with sleep. They love sleep. And so what is our relationship to sleep? Can we surrender to sleep? Can we surrender to not having absolutes and to, look at the studies and look at the blueprints and understand the overall general recommendations, but then invite, a curiosity and open possibility so that we can relax into sleep and surrender to sleep. Understanding our energetic tempo. And so what energetic tempo are we carrying? And what energetic tempo are we being influenced by in our surroundings, the people we're with, our workplace, our environments, and so on. Our health. This is what initially really catapulted me into this deeper way of understanding a new approach to child sleep, because I understood, nutrition is such a huge part of sleep. And I'm not just talking breastfeeding formula. I'm talking about what mom puts in her body and all the different minerals and vitamins, deficiencies, and so on, absolutely can affect her sleep and her baby's sleep. And then when the child starts solids, usually it's at that 6-month age when sleep training is beginning and so on, how that is affecting sleep. And so having a deep understanding of health all around, nutrition, breathing, movement. There are, you'll hear these two camps of sensory deprivation and overstimulation. And so you'll hear people say, or experts say, recommendations that, your child may be deprived of sensory and they really need to be active, physically active, and exercise. And this is going to really help them get better sleep. And in this day and age, we think, our children are too overtired and overstimulated. There's no way they need that. And then you have the other side, like I said, there's overstimulation. Children are overtired. And so how I look at these is this way. I say, what kinds of stimulation are your children receiving? If your child is overstimulated by an iPad, an iPhone, a television, loud noises, and small environments, car exhaust, if the child's overstimulation comes from that versus the overstimulation of or stimulation coming from running in nature, wrestling, just natural components of stimulation, that's a big difference. And your body and the child's body is going to respond very different to those different types of stimuluses. So when I look at a child, I look at and I weigh whether they're, sensory deprived or whether they're overstimulated based on the kinds of activities they're actually doing, right? And so once I start looking into that, then I can determine what's going on and whether they actually need different types of stimulus or not, and so on. Emotional intelligence and well-being. Hugely important, really understanding what is going on. And it's interesting because since our children cannot talk, don't have that capacity developmentally yet until, they're reaching 2 and up and starting that process, a lot of times the emotional intelligence and well-being factor weighs a lot into us as adults. How often we are stressed out or feeling strongly about no cry or cry, or, how many parents are, oh my gosh, if their child cries a little bit, it just triggers something in them. And so what's so important is, yes, we want to enhance and develop that emotional intelligence and well-being in our children, and really allowing them to feel safe and secure in developing those emotions and responding to them. But also just as important is understanding our own emotions and how they're being regulated and how, we're taking care of ourselves with this type of support that we need in those situations. And the more we can invite that support and a deeper emotional intelligence and well-being for ourselves, that's going to naturally support our children. So it's a big wake-up call. I see this transition as a big wake-up call, and it requires us to treat it like a wake-up call, because now is the time. We're reaching a stage of humanity where there is so much going on, and now is the time to revolutionize this new way of thinking, this expansive way of thinking. So I invite you to investigate. Don't take my word for anything. Go ahead and start researching all of the topics that I brought up and things that I brought up, and you'll start to understand that there's a much bigger expansive world that is not so easily able to be boxed into a set of methods and instructions, right? It's not that simple. But at the same time it is, because we're always learning. This requires a lifestyle change. So accountability, not everybody's ready for accountability. One of the things that I train and we work on with our members and graduates in our institution is understanding accountability and commitment. And so if a caregiver professional is not ready to commit to change for accountability, we have to really look at that, why that is. Because people may want to achieve a certain goal and they may want something. We want to understand why that is, what the intention or purpose is behind that. But if we don't apply and understand, and provide education along with that, and then also get a level of accountability and commitment, then that's going to limit our progress and involvement. And this transitioning from sleep training to a new possibility understands the integration. It's an integration that is going on, an integration of various possibilities and factors that weigh into this child sleep world that we have been trained to understand from mostly a behavioral perspective. This is just an example. It's always evolving, but I just wanted to show you an example of some of the sleep foundations that we look at as an organization. So we look at making sleep a priority for the whole family, not just the child. What we do is before we start applying any kind of approach or plan for a child's sleep, we first look at the caregiver or parent's relationship to themselves, because it is the caregiver and parent that are going to actually be implementing the sleep plan. And so what is their relationship to the situation? What is their relationship to themselves? What is their emotional well-being and intelligence? What is their health like? If they are suffering, if they have a medical issue going on, if they're not receiving as much support, and that is not taken care of first, how do we expect that parent or caregiver then to successfully implement a plan for their child? We have to take care of the people that are actually guiding the way, right? So that's what's also big here. Another way of integrating is that when we look at child sleep, we have to understand that we also have to take care of the caregivers and parents who are implementing and want this change. We want to look at that. We also want to understand not only the relationship that caregivers and parents have with themselves, but also to each other. What are those relationships between their partner, their household, or the child? We want to understand security on all levels. Especially from a child standpoint, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. We want to evaluate physical and mental health of parents, caregivers, and children. We want to assess the emotional well-being. We want to understand and assess what is causing a child or adult's behavior, because when we can understand that, that will help to shape the plan and approach we go forward by. And then you have the standard fundamentals of sleep environment, consistent scheduling, bedtime routines, regular napping, rest breaks for adults and children, nutrition, and so on. A lot of the recommended, making sure you don't use the bed as a work environment, so on and so on. There's all these other factors. But to really understand that, sleep is affected by a number of health factors and then vice versa. And really understanding that integration is really important. So this is just an example. Like I said, this is evolving all the time. So this is not going to be, in 6 months, I'm sure I'm going to be updating this with more. One other thing I wanted to point out is general versus specific advice. I took note of this, and this is something I also want to revolutionize in our perception and approach. Quite often I go into forums, I observe forums, and sleep forums, and so many people are writing in, oh, I've got this sleep issue, I've got insomnia, or my child, I have such problems with my child's sleep. He wakes up 4 or 5 times a night. Help me. And what I start to see, and it comes from a very good, well-intended place. So some of you might have seen on the event page, I put this infographic. And the infographic was how intention put together with awareness and education create a mindful action. Intention alone is great, but intention alone is not going to always lead to the best solution or approach, right? And I'm sure many of you understand that saying, the road to hell was paved with good intentions, right? So intention is great to one extent. And so in these forums, you have these really great, well-intended responses trying to help out these parents who have sleep-deprived children, or these parents who are sleep-deprived themselves. But the advice that's being given is so general. And one of the things that I've introduced to our organization and to our program is I've introduced a new way of thinking around this and approach this. Instead of just giving out general advice and recommendations, let's start asking questions to these people inquiring. So to these parents who are seeking, anybody who's seeking help, let's ask questions for them to dig deeper and empower them to get to the root of the sleep challenge, versus giving them a number of different potential general responses that may or may not work. As professionals, for those of you on the call that are professionals, we have a tremendous responsibility to help our clients get to the specific root and cause of a situation. And so if we're just throwing out general advice, we may not be getting to the root. Now, general advice has a place and it's great, so I'm not suggesting it's a bad thing. What I am suggesting is that usually when people seek help, there could be a number of approaches and solutions that could help them. And so to save them time, and as we know, most of us, and especially parents, have such limited time. And so the more time we can save parents and the more efficiency we can bring into the picture, the better off everybody's going to be. And so the general versus specific advice can happen in general forums. It could happen in in-person groups, in your own intakes. Could also happen in emails that are being sent to you. So just invite that process. So getting to the root. What is our perspective, our beliefs, our cultural influences, our expectations, misunderstanding what our children are trying to communicate. Our perspective and perception. This is what I think is a catalyst for this new movement and approach to a holistic revolution and integration to child sleep. Our lifestyle, and really understanding that our entire lifestyle is affecting. It's all, nothing is separate, it's all one. And so allowing ourselves to invite more of an integration, not a perfect life. We try, I'm sure most of us try to achieve balance. And for me, the goal is never perfection. The goal is really just to be very present and aware and go moment to moment and allow ourselves to invite the possibility of integration at every moment so that we're not stuck or boxed into just one way of thinking or being, because every moment is teaching us something we may know. It may be strengthening something that we may know, but every moment is also always opening up a new possibility. And this is what's evolving humanity. So if we can continue to invite that in, that will be, I feel this will be the greater good for all of humanity, not just child sleep. And so interesting too, something I got from Healing Nights, because I wanted to also bring some perspective to say that we have to work with where we're at and what we have. Dr. Ruben Nyman, he shared that Dr. Thomas Ware conducted a study to gain some insight into natural sleep patterns and prior to the use of excessive nighttime illumination. He found that when healthy adults were prohibited from using artificial light at night from dusk until dawn, their sleep patterns went through an unusual transformation. So I wanted to point that out because, a lot of times just returning to nature, going camping, just returning to nature can reset things and can invite a whole new unusual transformation for us. So it's great to reset. But what I also want to say to that is that we also have to be practical and realistic to our reality. Because the reality is that we're not going to be camping all the time, and we can't camp all the time. We can't, have a life that's just without lights at night all the time. And so what we're again looking for here, this is just an example of integration, is that we want to invite an integration of nature, an integration of modern culture, and understand how those two can work together so that we can achieve this balance. And we may need to have those moments of resetting and going out into nature. But when we can't, we can learn how to integrate. So some lifestyle component tools and practical applications, just to, again, put it all in more or less in order, is really looking at a gradual lifestyle change. This is what this means. So where I'm getting to is what's necessary is really looking at a gradual lifestyle change. Surrendering to sleep. Understanding our cycles, really understanding our sleep time, wake up time, just the cycles of things and how we adapt to those cycles. Adjusting and co-regulating our rhythms with those cycles, with our environments, with each other. Adjusting to an energetic tempo. allowing for an evening transition, because most times what happens is that and we expect this from our children too, is we go from, stimulation, stimulation, stimulation all day long, right? And then excessive blue light overexposure all day long. And then it's like, okay, sleep time, and we go to sleep. And there's no transition from day to night. The sun may go down, but we're still blasting lights, we're still blasting the television, we're still on the computers. Our children may absolutely be exposed to this, even if you've already put them down to sleep, let's say. And so, indirectly they're being exposed to this. And so understanding that transition is so necessary. One thing that I do, a tool that I use, is a breath check-in and adjustment throughout the day. And I call it pausing. I invite this in my classes. I invite this in my work with my clients. I've also introduced this tool to the professionals that I work with. And I call it pausing. And you can pause for a minute, 2 minutes, really no more than 5 minutes. But a few times a day, giving ourselves an opportunity to pause, to check our breath. We might even do a guided breath exercise. What this does is it gives us the ability in the daytime to release a lot of the stress, take little pockets and moments. These pauses allow then the mind to ease and to come into a deeper, peaceful state. And as a result, an accumulation that usually happens when you don't have any pauses, that becomes less, because what most people are experiencing right now is this strong accumulation all day long of all the stresses. And then at night, by the time nighttime comes, that accumulation is built so strongly, it basically explodes. And then people go into stresses and anxieties and worries and kept up all night. And this is what we're also modeling to our children. And so that energy in that home carries that. But if we can bring in those pauses and throughout the day and really checking in, it's a very, very practical tool. And I have had many successes with people adding this little piece in their life. It just takes a few minutes. And some of you may ask, well, I'll forget to do that. What I have my clients do is I have them set an alarm on their phone or on their computer or laptop. I set a little alarm to, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 7 o'clock, little reminder to take that pause. And then they time that pause. They time it for, however much is comfortable for them. 1 minute usually to start, and then they usually build up to 5 minutes. Okay, so now I'm going to take any questions. Let's see if I do have any questions here. I'm going to actually unmute everybody. Hopefully I won't get too much background noise. And then I'm going to take any questions, comments, feedback from anybody here. Let me just go ahead and let's see if I can unmute everybody. Okay, there we go. I think I'm mostly successfully unmuting everybody. Any questions or comments? Is this information new for anybody? Oh, hold on. I think some of you are still muted or unmuted. All right. Doesn't look like I can control everybody. Some of you are still muted, and some of you are not. Let me see if anybody wrote in the chat box here. Well, if you do have any questions or comments, anything that arises or comes up after this, I know I provided a lot of information today. I invite you to please contact me. You can contact me at maternityinstitute@gmail.com. Again, it's maternityinstitute@gmail.com. And I just invite you to take all the information that I will share today and investigate, question, really dig deeper into this. And if any questions arise, or if you'd like any more in-depth topics leading up to my book, I will be hosting more webinars on different topics, and then sharing excerpts from my books and giving more, getting more specific, let's put it that way. But today I just wanted to provide you an overall general understanding and also inspiration. My hopes that you were inspired by today's call to really understand child sleep from a whole new level than we've been currently trained to do. All right, so it doesn't look like anybody has any questions or comments, so I want to thank you all for attending today. It's been a pleasure and honor for me. I look forward to sharing my book with all of you. I will have definitely some practical examples and stories to share with you when my book comes out. I'm going to save that for that. And then on my event page, I will post the recording. So that recording will go up within the next 24 hours. And then if you do have any follow-up questions, like I said, you can email me or you can also post them directly to the event page. All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
We will stay connected. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.